Hi, this is Dr. Kate D, and today I have a special bonus episode. I was recently interviewed on the Fat Mascara Podcast. If you haven't heard of that, it's a really great podcast about all things beauty and beauty trends. And it was such a fun interview. I thought I would share that with you. So here's a special bonus episode of an interview on Fat Mascara Podcast.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Fat Mascara. It's a podcast about beauty culture. I am Jen Sullivan, your host. I have an amazing guest today. Before we get into who Dr. D is, I want to explain why we're doing this episode. So if you listen to this podcast, you're probably aware that there's often disturbing news items about the med spa industry. For example, 2 weeks ago, here in New York City, the owner of JGL Aesthetics was charged with fraud, smuggling, and crimes related to handling of counterfeit drugs because he was purchasing counterfeit Botox, illegally injecting it into his clients, and of course, pretending that it was real. I don't know if you remember this one from our podcast in November. A woman pretending to be a nurse in Massachusetts injected people with fake Botox there. And just last week in Philadelphia, I heard about a woman who ended up in the ER. She's been to the hospital multiple times with multiple infections after a nurse who was illegally running a med spa injected her with an unknown filler. I imagine every time you see one of these headlines, you think to yourself, how does this happen? So our guest today, Dr. D, she's going to help us understand that. Dr. Kate D runs the Glow Med Spa in Seattle, Washington. She's board certified in diagnostic radiology, and she worked as a breast cancer specialist for many years before training in and transitioning to aesthetic medicine. She's also the host of her own podcast, Med Spa Mayhem, and the author of the book, Med Spa Mayhem, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly Secrets of the Aesthetic Industry. So she's making it her mission to explain to people how med spas often operate outside the law and what you should know before you visit any of them. As you'll hear, she's also trying to work with the American Med Spa Association to come up with like a national organization that can accredit med spas so people will know which ones are operating legally. And if you're thinking that must exist already, you'd be surprised to hear that it does not. And as you'll hear Dr. D explain, some of the injectors and some of the spas may not even realize that their practices are illegal. So she's going to share her tips for finding a reputable aesthetic provider, how to look up credentials of whoever is doing any sort of procedure on you, whether it's Botox or laser hair removal or derma rolling. And she's just going to get you armed with some knowledge so you know that if you're going to a med spa, you need to check into some things before you sign any forms, before you get any treatments done. I hate that that's on the patient always to do that. It should just be assumed that these places are safe, but as you'll hear, they're not really. So we only have an hour with Dr. D. We kind of glossed the surface of this topic. It's really complicated. But if you're interested in learning more, you should definitely get her book. Again, that's Med Spa Mayhem, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly Secrets of the Aesthetic Industry. And I will link to that in the show notes. Okay, let's get into it. Dr. D, welcome to Fat Mascara. Hi.
Hi, thanks so much for having me today.
So I know you're a medical doctor, but you're not a plastic surgeon. You're not a dermatologist.
No, none of those things.
How did you even end up, we're going to be talking about med spas. I've already told everybody what's going on, but how did you even end up owning one?
Yeah, it's kind of a crazy story.
Tell me.
So I'm a radiologist by training, and I did a breast imaging fellowship and worked in breast cancer for 16 years. And so most of what I did back then was, read mammograms, ultrasounds, MRIs, and did biopsies and other breast procedures all day long. And I diagnosed breast cancer every day. And one day I had two of my long-term referring docs who both got their breast imaging with me, came to tell me they were retiring. And long story short, they had all their patients were still going to come to me, but their aesthetic patients had nowhere to go. And I was like, what do you guys do? And they told me all about it and said how much fun it was and how great it was. And they told me it was the best part of their practice. And they were like, Kate, you really should think about it because it is right up your alley. It's all doing needle procedures and talking to women all day, but you make them happy. And I had been not necessarily making everybody happy, telling them that they had breast cancer. And so anyway, long story short, they invited me to follow them around at their clinic before they closed it. They were both retiring. And so I did that, and it was just incredibly fun. And it was so similar to what I already did, but just happy and positive and super interesting, and a different, similar skill set, but just in a different direction, right? And I just thought, well, let me look into it. I will take some courses, and if it's fun, I'll do more. And if not, at least I got some CME. And the very first day of the first course I took was all on laser physics. And radiologists are physics geeks. We have a whole board. Like, we have 3 sets of boards, and one of them is entirely on physics. So I was just in heaven with this stuff. And it just was really fun. And so the more I did, the more I wanted to pursue it. And then honestly, I tried to do it within my old practice. And I will never forget that board meeting, because I presented a whole business plan to my partners. And basically they laughed at me. They were all men, and we don't think you can do this. And I was like, it was right before my birthday, like 10 years ago. And I was like, watch this. I just got angry. And I was just like, within 24 hours of that meeting, I had rented a space in my neighborhood and gotten my own malpractice insurance and hung up a shingle. I mean, basically, I was like, oh, yeah, well, let's see how it goes. And it just
nothing
grew.
like a competitive streak to fire someone up to take a change, make a change.
Yeah, that might be a little bit about me that you really want to know. Yeah, but I just loved it. And there are actually many, many physicians who are not dermatologists or practice plastic surgeons in the space. Now, there's quite a turf battle, and I wrote about that in my book. That's not my favorite thing, right? I think, why can't we all just get along?
Yeah.
And I think that anyone who dedicates their time and effort to doing something and becoming an expert in it and doing it all day, every day, they're going to get really good at it.
Yeah. But you're bringing an outsider perspective. And that, I think, is why your book makes sense from you, because a lot of the derms or plastic surgeons that might open up their own clinical practices or med spas, they've been in this world for a while, and they might not see the craziness that you seem to see and that you wrote about.
Well, I actually think they totally do.
They're just not telling us.
I think that, how many people can sit down and write a book in their spare time? I mean, most of us don't have a lot of spare time, but I do think that they're a little too up close. And I think that it's hard for them to see the big picture, that the plastics and the derms actually fight each other quite a bit over turf. And then they both tend to fight non-core doctors like me. But then they also have a big fight against the mid-level providers and lower who are doing this without a doctor, which I am also kind of on that really bothers me too. Because, in the United States, you cannot practice medicine if you're not licensed to practice medicine.
Let's talk about this. For people who aren't as immersed in this world as you and I are, when you started your journey to open the med spa, I think one would imagine you had a lot of regulatory hurdles to jump through, but what surprised you about the process?
Yeah, well, actually, there aren't any. So you might have, I imagine you've interviewed estheticians and spa owners who do non-medical spa stuff, right?
Yeah.
You have to get licensed by the cosmetology board. Your salon probably has to have its own license, and all the people working in it do. And they come and inspect and make sure your wax is clean and your little wooden sticks have covers on them and all that. Well, in the med spa space, there's none of that. There's no extra licensing. There's no inspections. There are a lot of laws, and hospitals and doctors know about the laws, and they know they have to comply. But there are so many people opening med spas that don't know about the law, don't have licensure. There are no inspections. There's none of that. And so your average med spa, there's maybe a nurse there nurses can't practice medicine. Nurses can only carry out a doctor's orders. Well, there are a lot of med spas that are just owned and run by nurses. Now, it's not legal, but nobody's actually policing that at all.
Yeah. So is there an entity that oversees the operation and safety of med spas, other than, like, say, getting business license for like an insurance for the physical space? Is there?
No, there is not.
There's no cosmetology board of med spas, if you will, even at the state level.
No. And all the state laws are different governing medicine. I'm actually trying to create that.
And you're in Washington, right?
Yeah, but I'm trying to create a national nonprofit that's going to certify med spas, because currently right now, all the laws are different in all the states. The one true thing, or there are many true things, but the biggest thing is in all 50 states, you can't practice medicine if you're not a doctor. Okay. Now, many states have laws that allow independent practice of nurse practitioners, but nurse practitioners are practicing advanced nursing. So I've learned this from my lawyer friends. This is not something I knew even before. I even wrote the book before I knew this. So nurse practitioners technically can practice independently, but they're practicing advanced nursing. And in some states, if they say, I'm practicing medicine, they can actually get dinged by the state. Depends on who's paying attention. In many states, a nurse practitioner can technically own a med spa and practice in the med spa independently without a doctor. But in many states, they can't. And registered nurses, which, when you say a nurse, that's what that means. They can't practice independently in any state. Okay. They are not allowed to do that, but they know how to inject Botox. They know how to do many of the procedures. And so they get trained to do the procedures, let's say in a dermatology office. And they're like, well, I should be able to set up my own business.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't necessarily know to consult a lawyer. And the lawyer will say, well, you can't do that. Right? The lawyer will say, well, you need to practice under a doctor, which means you need a medical director. Now, some of them do know this, but many of them don't.
But when would that come to bite them in the butt later? Only if something goes wrong, right?
Yeah, but guess what? When something goes wrong, they could lose their nurse's license, right? But that's it. Nobody comes and arrests them. Actually practicing medicine without a license is a felony. Okay. From my understanding, it's a felony in every state, but nobody's enforcing that. So the DAs or whatever, the prosecutors, they don't take those cases there. As far as I know, I've never seen a case of a nurse practicing medicine without a license being actually charged with a crime. So if they harm somebody and send somebody to the hospital, that's possible, but I haven't seen that happen. For instance, there were all these cases of botulism last year and people being sent to the hospital because nurses were ordering fake Botox off the internet.
I wanted to ask you about this because it's not just nurses, but yes.
Well, yeah, and non-medical people as well. Okay. So the one I know of in Illinois, there was 11 different states, but the one I know of in Illinois was a nurse practitioner. Well, I don't know if she kept her license. I think she just claimed ignorance, right? But as far as I know from that whole thing, there weren't any criminal charges anywhere. So it's not just that people are cutting that corner of ordering fake product. That's very common. That's happening all over the place. But that there really are no consequences. There's nobody being arrested. But there are cases where, okay, fine, the nurse lost her license. I should say her or his license. There are men in this as well. They went out and they kept practicing anyway, and nobody's arresting them. So there was actually this nurse practitioner in Oklahoma. This was written about in a newspaper article a few months ago. I think the newspaper was called The Frontier. And there's a nurse practitioner who was actually caught importing illegal product from foreign countries and stuff. She lost her license for a period of 3 years. She kept practicing under a different name, a different med spa name. She was practicing under her own name. And as this got reported on, she scrubbed her name from the website, but you could tell from the Google reviews that they were thanking her, oh, she did a great job.
Yeah.
And they named her. And so nobody arrested her for practicing medicine without a license, even though she was openly doing that for 3 years. And I don't know if she got her license was just at the 3-year mark when this article came out. But what I'm saying is that in general, the consequences are so minimal. And so people are out there doing it, making money for as long as they possibly can without much of a consequence. And even if they lose a license, so they don't care and they just keep doing it and making the money and nobody arrests them. And it just seems like there's no consequence for this. In my book, I quote, there was a guy in Texas who wasn't even an RN, and he got arrested for injecting Botox that was imported from Turkey, because when they arrested him, the vial of Botox had Turkish on it, right? So he went to jail, there were headlines, but then he went right back out and opened his place up again when he got out of jail, and nothing really happened to him. And it's I don't know. there just aren't consequences,
Yeah.
right?
Well, let's pretend someone is opening a med spa the way you're supposed to, which means there's a medical director on site and anything is performed with a physician's knowledge
Yeah.
and they're the one ordering it. At that point, what is the difference between a medical doctor, a physician assistant, a nurse injector? What do you even think of that term, nurse injector? What are their differences in skills if they're doing it the way that they should be, that's legally operated?
Well, that is kind of where it should be,
right?
Which is you're looking for somebody who's experienced, who's skilled, who's personable, who's listening to you, who's hearing what you're telling them as far as what your goals are. If they're really legitimate and they're doing, everything by the book and they're getting real product and stuff, then it's just a matter of finding a great one, finding somebody you jive with, finding somebody who, it's like finding someone fantastic. I've got super curly hair. You know how hard it is to find somebody who can cut my hair, right? So for me, it's like, that's the challenge, is finding somebody who really gets me and what my needs are, right? I would love it if everybody in the country were doing it by the book, and that's all you were looking for was high skill, experience, someone who's listening to you and you jive with. Unfortunately, the vast majority of places you go to, I can guarantee, are doing at least one thing, if not multiple things, kind of cutting corners.
It puts it all on you, the patient or the consumer, to do the research. So we're going to help people a little bit. I have some questions to get into that. But before we do, I have to ask, is it legal to go to let's say you go to a med spa and you never see the doctor? Because this is the case even with when there's the medical director who's like maybe an hour away, they like overseas, but they're not actually on site ever, right, which is the case. If you've never been examined by a physician, is it illegal if someone's going to then inject something in your face?
Well, it depends on who you see. So the people who are allowed to do that initial consultation, what's oftentimes called legally as the good faith exam.
Yes.
Okay. Now that came from California. California, that's what it's called. But then that's become sort of spread across the country as that's what we call that initial exam. A doctor or a nurse practitioner working under a doctor, if a state requires that, or a nurse practitioner independent if they're in a state that allows that, or a physician's assistant working under a doctor. Those people can all do the good faith exam.
You did not say registered nurse.
Nurses cannot do it in any state.
You did not say master esthetician. You did not say cosmetologist.
Correct. So if you go and you say, all right, look, I just want to touch up on my laser hair removal. I know I want it. I know I'm a good candidate for it. I just want to have the one thing. I don't want a consultation. If they say, sure, our master esthetician can do that, or sure, our RN can do that, that's illegal because you are a new patient to that practice and they've never seen you before. So it is not legal for them to go ahead and do the Botox or the laser or any medical treatment.
I didn't even think of the laser. Do you know how many people right now are listening to this and being like, well, I did an illegal activity? Well,
I can tell you, I've had patients where my new patient coming to see me for the consultation is a lawyer. And they used to go to the RN or the girl down the street. And when I'm like, oh, really, girl, like what was her licensure? And my lawyer patient doesn't know. Okay. Because even the lawyers, if they're not practicing healthcare law, they don't even realize like, oh, I'm going to this place. It looks legit. They're wearing scrubs. This is a nurse. She knows what she's doing. I like her. Even if she's been doing it for 15 years, it doesn't mean that she's doing it legally. It's not that that person's even like trying to do something wrong or illegal. They just, hey, look, I've been doing this for 15 years. Why would you need to see someone else first? Well, why? Because that's what the law says. The other thing we haven't touched on, which we don't necessarily need to talk about, but the other thing that's rampant illegal is the corporate ownership of the med spa.
Say more.
So most states in this country have very strong what's called corporate practice of medicine laws, meaning if you're a corporation, you can't practice medicine and you can't employ doctors. And that is meant to protect patients from business owners dictating healthcare, okay? So doctors are supposed to be independent practice, like do the best for our patient, because doctors, I can tell you, they're Now, there are scummy doctors out there. There's no question. Okay. But for the most part, we all went into medicine because we want to help people and we want people to be healthy and whatever, take care of them. So corporate practice medicine states that a business person can't come along, hire a doctor, and practice medicine through that doctor or tell the doctor what to do.
That is literally how med spas work, some of the larger franchises.
Right. Well, so again, there are legal ways to do that. They own a thing called an MSO, a Management Services Organization. An MSO can own the spa-like parts of the spa. So they can own the lease to the space. They can own equipment and computers. They can employ the front desk people. They can do all the kind of billing, HR, all the spa-like stuff, business stuff. But the doctor has to own the medical practice, okay? And the doctor actually has to get paid to do the medical procedures and then pay the MSO to manage all the spa stuff, okay? So the lawyers have figured out a way to write these MSO contracts, right? There's what's called an MSA or a management services agreement between the MSO, the business people, and the doctor. And basically the lawyers write all kinds of stuff in there so that essentially the MSO is controlling everything.
On paper, the paper trail says this person's doing medicine.
So the paper trail says the money goes in the right direction to the doctor and then to the MSO. But essentially the doctor's relinquishing most of the control over all of that to the MSO, the business people. The idea is to protect the consumer from that business doing stuff to you that is not in your best interest, right? And so there's a reason why there's supposed to be a doctor there protecting you and your health, right?
Right.
So there are many, many med spas, however, and I'm not talking about the big chains because the big chains have big lawyers who are writing this stuff for them. So they're probably dotting their I's and crossing their T's and making sure that it's legal. But there are many, many med spas across the country that are independently owned illegally. Okay. So a business person goes to Vegas and sees the IV bars there, which by the way is a whole other topic of why you should not go to one of those. But
read the book for the IV chapter.
Right. So, but they go, oh my God, this is so great that we don't have any of these in my city. Let's open one. And they're just a business person. They're just an entrepreneur. Yeah. So then they hire a nurse or a phlebotomist or whoever, or a former paramedic to put in IVs.
Right.
And they might get a business license, but they don't have a medical director. They don't realize they're practicing medicine. Okay. But then eventually they maybe figure out, maybe they go to an AmSpa meeting. Someone figures out, oh, we need a medical director. So they might get a medical director, but they still might not have an MSO. Like there are all these different medical places that look legit, but are really so not, right? Because when you think about it, okay, I'll just go right back to why you should not get an IV. So there's no quicker way to kill someone with an IV than with an IV. And if you go to a med spa or just an IV bar and they put the wrong thing in you, it could kill you, okay? Or make you very, very sick.
Yeah.
That's why, right? I mean, I started my book with this bit about this woman who died in exactly that way in Texas last summer. Well, 2 summers ago now. But the thing is that, right, who do you want making that decision? Is it you when you don't know anything about medicine? Is it the owner of this place who doesn't know anything about medicine? Or do you want someone who really knows what kind of IV you could even tolerate, much less would benefit from? You need a medical person to make that decision. And the idea of an IV bar where you just order an IV up like it's a martini is so insane
But that's because you're a doctor. You have to understand, like a real person going in probably assumes, in the same way they assume every skincare product they've tried has been tested by the government before it went on the shelves.
Right.
Like it just feels like that's how it should be. So
right. But people don't know. It's not. Yeah. And it can be quite dangerous. So, I mean, the lady who died in Texas, like this woman who didn't know what she was doing, hung potassium and killed her, like executed her. And as I've said a couple times on my podcast, that's how prisoners on death row are executed, by hanging potassium.
Yeah, she overdosed this person. Well, okay,
they get sedated first.
Yeah, of course. No, it's horrible. But I think Let's stick for a second with the cosmetic treatments, just because I think that that's what a lot of our listeners are looking for, and they're not sure about this. Besides just the med spas and how they're set up and how there's a lack of regulation there, I wanted to just talk to you briefly about regulation for the machines and drugs used within these spas. So who is in charge of making sure those treatments are safe? And I know that's different for, say, a drug versus a machine, but how would you explain it to someone?
I mean, in the spa, the medical director is responsible for that. So that's me and my spa. And if there's a medical director, hopefully that's in their job description. And then as far as government regulatory bodies, so every laser is governed by the FDA. And so if it's an FDA approved or cleared laser, and those are two different things, then that laser is approved to be used on people, but only under the label that the FDA provides, meaning so they govern who can do it and how it can be done. And you can't sell a laser to a non-doctor. So a nurse can't buy a laser. They have to have some doctor on the paperwork in order to buy it in the first place, right?
Yeah, but in your book, you even said a company sent a laser to your house once when you were sampling
a device, a different device. I know. Yeah, that was super. Yeah. That was,
so it's not to say the companies aren't going to sell things to people who shouldn't be buying them, right?
That's how you would be able to tell that this is a dicey company. I mean, the big laser company, these are very expensive devices. So, I mean, the most expensive device that I own in my spa retails for $350,000. Okay. Most lasers are somewhere between.
Wait, now I have to know which device it is.
That's M-Face. That is M-Face.
M-Face. Okay.
Yes, and then Emsculpt Neo's $250K, and then most of the other lasers we have are between $1 and $150. No, $1 and $200K. They're very expensive devices, right? And these big laser companies are not going to sell a real laser to, a non-medical person. In their paperwork, they need a medical director. They don't need, so usually they also need the medical director to sign it, right? So, but for a nurse to order one of these lasers, they would need a medical director, at least on paper.
Right. But there's all sorts of other treatments now. Like the minute a spa opens, I see treatments and I'm like, I have never even heard of this. We're now derma rolling, but we decided to take out the PRP and we're doing it this way. The minute the tools become available, people think up new ways to use them. Is anyone regulating these new ways?
Well, so there are laws that apply, but they're not being followed. Doctors are allowed to do anything off-label if they decide it's medically appropriate. Mm-hmm. So as a physician, I could take PRP and use it for facial rejuvenation. That's legal. And people working under me, if I essentially instruct them to do that, there are different laws.
Platelet-rich plasma. This is they extracted your blood, they centrifusion spun it, got the good stuff. That's PRP. Go on.
Even Botox. So Botox is approved for injecting certain areas. If you use Botox in other areas, that's using it, quote unquote, off-label because the FDA did not approve that. Okay. Now, nurses are not allowed to decide to use something off-label. They're just not allowed to do that. PAs can do it. NPs can do it, but as far as under what supervision, that's different in every state, so I can't speak to that.
So if it's a nurse injector and you went to them and they gave you quote unquote skin Botox, which is micro injections all over your face, not to the areas that have
they can carry that out if a doctor prescribed it, but they can't decide to do that on their own. But that's true even of on-label for nurses, right?
Right.
So it's really a little bit complicated, right? I think that a lot of people don't even understand, even a lot of medical people don't understand the difference between on-label and off-label use. Mm-hmm. And as far as ensuring safety, okay, anything that's off-label, the doctor has to take a stand and say, this is appropriate and this is why, right? That has to be and we have to document why we think this is appropriate. Some things are very simple, okay? Like with a lot of things in aesthetics, let's just take Botox, right? Allergan, the company that makes Botox, has done massive studies in order to get FDA approval for certain uses. And honestly, Botox is the only neurotoxin that's FDA approved for the three basic places where we always put it, between the 11s, forehead lines, and crow's feet, okay? Now, one other common place is bunny lines, those ones, right?
Yeah, near your nose.
Which some people have. No neurotoxin is approved for that, but we use it all the time. It's really easy. There's like essentially no.
We, the physician speaking,
Yeah,
yes.
but in general, I mean, in aesthetics, it's a very easy thing to do. It doesn't take a lot of toxin, and there are essentially no. I have never seen a complication from injecting bony lines. Okay, I suppose if you did it in the wrong place, that would be a problem. But it's just not. That's off label, even though everybody does it. Same thing for using it for other areas, like for the DAOs down here when you've got RBF. Are we allowed to say resting bitch face on your podcast?
You sure are.
Yeah, but that's off label. Now that can have lots of complications, and you don't want to have that done by somebody who doesn't know what they're doing.
Well, this is what it comes down to with not just off label, but with all of these procedures that if they're not done well, that's when there's trouble for the patient. I have to ask you, I'm going to pause you for a second. Like, do you think of all of the treatments that you do at your med spas, do you think there are some that are much harder? If we're going to go to a med spa and listen, we don't know if the medical director's on site or whatever, what would you caution people not to do if you're not sure? A little 11s with the Botox, maybe that's not so hard to mess up. Hanging an IV, don't do that. But
I wouldn't do IV. Yeah, I would definitely not go do IVs. So the crazy thing is the most common things are the most dangerous. So filler is hugely dangerous, okay? Filler gone wrong can have horrible consequences. You can go blind. You can have necrosis of your skin. You could lose the tip of your nose. It could be really bad. So finding somebody who's really doing it legally and knows what they're doing and also knows how to treat a complication. So when filler goes in the wrong place, we actually run little practice codes in my practice. And it should be extremely rare. And you should be able to know how to treat it and have enough of the enzyme hyaluronidase in your fridge to be able to treat that.
Immediately.
Preferably have an ultrasound available, preferably have a relationship with a plastic surgeon or an oculoplastic surgeon, preferably have a relationship with someone who has hyperbaric oxygen you could get if you need it. The worst complications that I have seen and the people I've interviewed on my podcast have been complications from filler where the person did not know how to treat the complication, okay? And it was really bad. Okay, so that would be number one. Anything else injecting into your body, I would caution people, make sure you're going somewhere legitimate and they're ordering legitimate product because there's fake product off the internet, and that is what we're seeing more in the headlines over the last year, are people being contaminated with tainted stuff that they've gotten off of Alibaba or fake Botox that sent them to the hospital. So that would be anything that's actually being injected into you. But the other giant thing is laser hair removal. So a lot of places are using IPL devices to do laser hair removal. They're just not as efficient and also more dangerous because you can burn people with that. And so if you have darker skin, you have to be super careful. But even medium skin and any Asian person, like basically if you have a skin type that has a tendency to have if you tend to hyperpigment, let's just say, then it can be super dangerous. So you can get burns, you can get hyperpigmentation, or worse, hypopigmentation, where that little rectangle or circle becomes white.
Laser for hair loss. Is this also lasers
This is laser hair removal. This is any laser can burn you, but lasers in the wrong hands can be quite dangerous. If you think about it, you can shoot down a missile from outer space with a laser. Okay, lasers can be turned up and you can really, really hurt somebody. So I just think that having the right person who knows what they're doing with the laser and then also having the right laser is really important. And it's hard to know. Like if you're a consumer, it's really hard to know like, well, what laser is that? And how do I figure that out? And so I think those are the biggest risks.
Like if you don't feel like doing homework, at least with those, do the homework. Whereas something like something that uses like a derma pen or a derma roller.
Well, derma rollers, I think, are crazy. I would stay away from rollers.
Why?
Well, they can't really be sterilized and they get dull and those little needles, you can't change them out.
Right. Well, they're using new ones for every patient, aren't they?
Well, you'd have to, right? But whereas a derma pen or, that's a brand name, any microneedling pen will be a new sterile tip every time. But I have heard of places cutting corners by reusing tips. Now, that can spread disease, that can spread HIV, I I know that sounds insane, but people do it. And I've actually heard that from RF microneedling as well. People reusing tips for that. Those tips are very expensive. So typically the tip for a microneedling pen is somewhere anywhere from 20 something to 60 something dollars per tip. Okay. The tips for the RF microneedling that we have is $125 per tip. And that's pretty pricey, right? I can see people's wanting to reuse them, but they are not reusable. Okay. That's like reusing needles. I mean, you're going to spread.
Well, this is a red flag. If someone's getting quoted a price for like $100 introductory special for microneedling,
they've got to be cutting corners somehow, because just the consumables alone. Look, for me, like we use a growth factor serum and of course, a brand new tip for every single patient. And we use really high quality numbing stuff. Like all those things cost a lot of money, but you're going to get much better results from it, right?
Yeah.
If you are reusing a tip or using the cheapest tip possible and using no growth factor serum, a lot of places do microneedling with no growth factors. And I mean, you're just not going to get as good a result from that.
Are you going to get any result if you just like injure the skin with a little needle?
Well, because you do have growth factors in your own blood. So you have that.
So I could set off a little bit of a boost.
Is it worth it though? Like if you're going to have that procedure, wouldn't you want the best results possible, right? And so that's the difference between going to not just a legitimate place, but a place that's looking to maximize your results. Because some places are looking to keep their costs as low as possible and see as many patients as possible. Right.
Okay. So say we're consumer. Let's talk about the different kind of places people can go to. We're not you. I bet Dr. D can walk into any spa in this country and be like, red flag, red flag, red flag. We're walking out.
Well, you can kind of tell from the website.
Okay. Tell me, what would people look for? What would be some red flags of this operation is probably not safe?
Right. Well, the number one thing is look for if you're just looking at the website.
Let's do website first.
Look for the medical director on the website.
Their name should be on there.
Their name.
Not just a medical director. Okay.
Right. Their name, their bio. And you should be able to at least get an appointment with that medical director eventually. Maybe it's not for 3 months because they're booked out. Or maybe they only come in person every so often. Right.
Okay.
But if you can never, ever, ever get a hold of them, they're never there. Okay. Like for me, like I don't see patients all that often anymore. I'm kind of way out. But like right now, I'm speaking to you from my home office. I live 5 minutes from my spa and I'm there kind of all the time, right? But you should be able to get an appointment with them and then also look up their license and see
how does one do that?
Oh, that's so easy. And I do have links to that from like my book and stuff. But basically every doctor, you can look them up. There's a national provider index and you can look them up. It's very easy to do that. And maybe I'll get you a link. You can put it in your show notes.
So that medical director better be on that site when you look them up.
Yeah. And so you can look them up and you can see what their credential is and where they work. Like maybe they work at a hospital 100 miles away as an anesthesiologist, let's say, right?
Yeah.
That's interesting. Well, are they ever there? You can even call the spa. Are they ever there?
So the fact that it's 100 miles away gives you more pause than the fact that this is not an aesthetic medicine that they practice, such as...
Well, I mean, there are plenty of anesthesiologists who are in aesthetics and they are really great. It's not that they're in... I mean, I'm a radiologist by training, right? But I've been doing this for 10 years.
I just wanted to point that out. It was like the location of them that you're taking issue.
But like, let's say I work full-time at a hospital 100 miles away. Obviously, I'm not.
How could you ever be on site and checking the lasers that they're up to date and giving exams, et cetera.
So, and then you look at the staff and you look at who's there, right? They need at least a PA or a nurse practitioner or an MD that you can see to do the good faith exam. If there's none of those people on there, who's doing the good faith exam? They're not there to do it, right?
Well, nobody is.
Right.
Dr.
Now,
D.
some places outsource that. There are companies that will do a good faith exam. They'll literally be like a 5-minute Zoom call where a nurse practitioner in another state is doing your quote unquote good faith exam and making recommendations.
So if you're a new patient at any clinic, you would expect that should happen.
You have to get one. Yes.
I know there is probably 3/4 of people listening who have been to a med spa and been like, I don't think I got a good faith exam.
Right. Well, you might not recognize it if they did it and it was a 5-minute Zoom call,
Okay.
And you thought, oh yeah, that was weird. I met this nurse practitioner. She said hi.
Would they ask your medical history? And
They're supposed to.
Okay,
They're supposed to. But there are these companies that do it that tell me that it takes 5 minutes. And for instance, there was an IV bar at a hotel in Vegas. I was at a conference not that long ago, and I went down there and I asked them, oh, hey, like, can I get an IV? What's that process like? And they told me that they do a 5-minute Zoom call with somebody first. And I'm like, okay, I get it. So they're at least, crossing that T.
But you want that to happen if you're a new patient.
At least that, yeah. I mean, the goal, that person is supposed to make sure that you can medically tolerate whatever it is, right?
Okay.
So let's say it's just Botox. They're going to make sure you don't have a neurological disease, you don't have MS, you don't have some undiagnosed issue that would mean that you can't get Botox, right? And for an IV, then they'd be looking for heart disease, kidney disease, other things that would prevent you from being able to get an IV. And they have to at least make sure they're not going to kill you, right?
So back to this website, we want to find the medical doctor. We want to make sure on site at one point it is either a PA, an NP.
Or a doctor. Yeah.
Or a doctor.
And then, you see who the owner is. I mean, you won't be able to tell. But like there is this one that I looked at recently where the owner was a laser tech, had no medical degree at all. And everybody in the place were RNs. And there was no medical director listed. Okay. To me, all those things are red flags, right? Like, it's not owned properly. There's no, even a mid-level provider, there's nobody in there higher than an RN. I wouldn't touch that place with a 10-foot pole, personally.
So if I call to make an appointment and I say, oh, by the way, thanks for the appointment. By the way, who's the medical director for this facility? And they can't tell you.
Yeah, I didn't notice
cancel
one.
The appointment.
I didn't notice one on the website. Like there was another one that I called, and this was because there was a nurse practitioner who wanted to be on my podcast. And so I just looked up her website, and long story short, she was in a state where nurse practitioners can't practice independently. So it's like, oh, I called the spa. I was like, oh, I see, this is who would I see? And like, who's your medical director? And when I asked that question, they said, well, we're still working on that. They knew they needed one, but they didn't have one yet. But they were up and running. I mean, they were operational even without, and they knew that.
And they might eventually get one. We're not saying they wouldn't.
Yeah, they might have one by now.
But would you recommend people listening don't go anywhere until that is in place?
Well, that's the thing is that, if they just have it on paper and that person's never there, I mean, obviously they're not medically directing.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I know that sounds ridiculous, but if you have a medical director, that should mean that they're directing the medical practice.
Yeah. Besides asking about a medical director, what are some other questions you'd suggest someone ask when they're booking an appointment? Maybe they just want like laser hair removal or whatever it is.
I mean, I would ask, well, who your initial consultation would be with.
Right.
And will they cater the treatment to my skin and my needs? Because a lot of places just have protocols in place and they don't actually cater anything to your skin.
And you want to ask what that person's credentials are, I imagine, not
Always
just what their name is.
Always ask the credentials, but then I also, once you get those, you look it up. So look up every nurse, look up every PA, every NP, and just make sure they're actually licensed in your state. Because a lot of times it says something and it's not true. I mean,
someone with a laser, say the doctor comes in, they do all the check, but then they hand it off to someone who isn't a nurse or PA.
Sometimes, yeah. And so sometimes that's
illegal. I've had that happen to me. I've gone for laser hair removal.
Well, it depends on the state and what their regulations are. Like, for instance, in my state, we have a special thing called master esthetician. I think there are only 6 or 7 states in the country that have that designation. And so estheticians can get a special degree. Doesn't take that. It takes 13 weeks to get it. And special training. And they get this designation, master esthetician. And they can essentially become a laser tech. They can work under a doctor doing certain medical procedures.
Okay. So again,
that is not true in most states. Most states don't allow that, but in my state, yes. And then some states have laser techs, other states do not. And some states require that laser tech person to be at least an RN. Other states do not.
Do you know of any state where someone who just has a cosmetology license can wield a laser?
No, I don't.
Do you know how many laser hair places have just cosmetologists wielding a laser?
Yes. I don't actually know the denominator there.
Me neither. I wasn't
high.
Being rhetorical because I've definitely been to those places.
Yeah. I mean, some of them have gone bankrupt because they haven't been doing it properly, right? I mean, this has been a number of years, but American Laser went bankrupt. I think it was, I'm going to forget the other name of it, Laser Away.
Was that a franchise? Sorry, I'm not familiar.
Yeah, that was a national
laser hair removal
I don't
chain.
know if it was a franchise or if it was just a national chain that was centrally owned, that they went out of business. And actually they were going gangbusters when I first started this 10 years ago. And 10 years ago, I did not start offering laser hair removal because every day there was some kind of Groupon or Living Social, or whatever it's called. I mean, because it was so cheap. And I'm like, I don't know how they do that. I don't know how they do that and keep it so cheap, because it's just the laser itself is so expensive. That laser was, I think, close to $200,000. And it's very finicky and hard to maintain and very expensive to run. And so I was like, I can't compete with that. So I didn't do it. And it wasn't until they went out of business and all the Groupons disappeared that I was able to buy that laser and like
since you brought up Groupon, I have to ask. I know we were doing red flags. We'll get back to if we missed any with Dr. D in a second. But in your book, you said, do not go anywhere that has all 5-star reviews on Yelp.
Yeah, well,
tell everybody why.
There's so many there are all these fake reviews. Also on Google and Amazon, honestly.
That should be a red flag if it's all 5s, is what you're saying.
If it's not a single 4 or 3 or 2 or 1-star review, I mean, that's impossible. So people are buying
the ones that freak me out are when it's all 5s and all 1s. So I feel like all the 5s were paid for and all the 1s are the real reviews.
It's possible. I mean, it's possible. There's no way of avoiding 1-star reviews. I mean, I don't have a lot, but I mean, I had one lady who screamed at my front desk person, and because we require a credit card to hold an appointment. And so we charge a no-show fee if you don't show up. We charge a late cancel fee if you cancel at the last second and don't have a good excuse. But anyway, this lady never came in, never booked an appointment, screamed at my front desk, and went immediately on Yelp and wrote a 1-star review saying, how dare they require a credit card? That's, ridiculous. And I was just like, and my front desk person was so frazzled by this, and she saw the 1-star review immediately. She's like, oh my gosh, Dr. D, it's my fault. I'm so sorry. She refused. And I was like, look, it's fine, because if anybody really agrees with that, they won't come. And that's okay, because you need a credit card to reserve a restaurant half the time and to get your lashes done half the time. And right.
And a legitimate practice is going to maybe have a 1-star here and there. And
I mean, it's going to happen. Right. Yeah, and there's going to be people who are, but hopefully it's few and far between. And most people are just happy. But, the other crazy thing is, like, a lot of people love you, and they still give you a 4-star review. So if it's all 5s and not
a 5
and there's no
perfect.
4s.
I get that.
Yeah. I mean, I was like, wow, what was she holding back for? I'm like, I don't know.
But you read the review underneath the stars, so you see that it's a positive review.
Yeah.
But back to just, I know we're running out of time here, but the red flags, you gave us some really good ones, and we have this link now to look up the medical director and make sure it's all legit. Is there anything else? Like, there's been so many headlines in the news lately about like counterfeit Botox. Like, is there anything else you would tell people to look for or ask about when they go into
ahead of time? I would say so avoid any place charging you ahead of time for a procedure. So there are places that will charge you in advance. Don't go there. Okay. There are some famous big national companies that do that. Don't do that, because it's non-refundable and they will basically keep your money. You've never even been there. So I would ask, like, if you are having a virtual good faith exam, I would avoid that. So I would say any place that says, oh, we'll do that ahead of time by Zoom or by video, ask if you are actually seeing somebody at the spa. And am I going to see you and have my procedure done with you? Because there are companies that will have you.
If you're a new patient, especially.
If you're a new patient, they're doing that to a call center in some other state. And you end up prepaying and walk into the spa. You've never met a single soul there. What if you don't like them? What if you don't like your provider? What if the provider just doesn't seem right to you? Or if they don't seem like they know what they're doing? You've already paid. You've already had a consult with someone else in another state. Like, just don't.
I've heard
avoid
so many
that.
people that, they get roped into things, and all of a sudden something's happening, and they feel uncomfort, and they're not trusting their gut. And
if it doesn't feel right, that's a big red flag. If they try to upsell you day one red flag. If they try to get you to commit to something day one and say, oh, this is only available today, giant red flag. Those are all sales techniques. That's not medicine. So, if you're going to a really great place, they're going to educate you. They're going to explain how the procedure works. They're going to give you all the information and not pressure you to do a medical procedure that you may or may not want to do.
Is there a way? Okay, I'm just thinking about all of these things cost money and time on your side as the provider. And this is why it costs a lot of money to get these procedures. However, they're marketed all over the place. People see their friends getting it. It makes it seem like this is no big deal and I don't need a ton of money to be able to do it. I'm going to shop by price. Is there a price that you've seen where you're just like, oh my God, if something costs below this price, you should not be doing it.
Everything is like that.
But like for like Botox, which is probably one of the most common cosmetic procedures.
Botox, if you see a Groupon for Botox, don't go there. There's no way they're offering that for that price and it's real Botox, because like I've seen Botox Groupons for like $8 a unit and it costs that to buy real Botox. Okay. You might get a little frequent flyer discount.
How many units are in a CC?
We don't measure it by CC.
What does a unit mean? That means nothing to me. I've never had a derm ask me about the price of a unit.
Oh, yeah. So most places sell Botox by the unit because everybody needs a different amount. So typically, like for your 11s, it's usually 20 units, sometimes a little lower, sometimes a little higher. Okay. And to buy Botox, you buy one vial, it's got 100 units in it.
That's what I was asking. Sorry.
Right. Yeah.
One vial.
I mean,
okay.
If you add up the cost of the Botox, which is now over $700 a vial, plus the syringe and the gauze and the alcohol and all the other stuff, it's essentially at least $8 a unit. There's no way that you can offer Botox for $8 a unit and not lose money. There's no way. Plus, that's if you don't even charge. If you're not paying the person to inject it, right? Like,
yeah, I feel like it's interesting you said that. I feel like we've gotten that lesson with nail salons. We learned like, wait, think about it. If your manicure took an hour and it cost $15, how much did the person making the manicure get? You know what I mean?
Sure.
So you apply that same math, I'm sure, to dermatological procedures like this or cosmetic procedures.
So around here anyway, I mean, and you're not even talking about overhead, the cost of being in the space you're in, the insurance, all the things. So for, different cities might be a little more or less, right? I would imagine Botox in New York would cost a lot more money. If it's cheap and you're in an expensive city, something's going on there. Okay. There's no way that's real Botox, or there's no way they're really paying for it. So, I mean, we charge right now, I'm in Seattle, it's $15 a unit. That's pretty standard in my city. There are some places that are a bunch more. There are a couple places offering it for less, but they've got to be having some cheap deal somehow, right?
Yeah.
But a Groupon for $10 or less is like, it's maybe a loss leader, but that's the only way I can think of to eat that cost. It's just expensive stuff.
Yeah. So price being something else, like if it's too good to be true.
Yeah, and there are other neurotoxins. So there's 5 FDA-approved neurotoxins in the U.S. You can get some of them for cheaper than Botox, for sure. You can get a cheaper price on any of them if you buy in bulk. And so if you're a place like mine, we're really busy, we do buy in bulk, and we try to get as good a deal as possible, right? But it's still not that much less. But you can buy fake Botox off the internet for a tiny fraction of that.
Does it surprise you when you hear those headlines about, there was just another one last week, a guy here in New York was using counterfeit Botox. When you hear these headlines,
I gotta find that. I was on vacation last week. I gotta go find that headline.
Yeah, no.
It doesn't surprise me. It surprises me that it's not in the headlines more. I think it's actually happening a lot more and that it's not hitting the headlines. We're just not finding out about it. I think that it's rampant. And, and it's not just Botox. It's all fillers. It's the other injectables.
You're surprised there haven't been more problems, or that we haven't heard about more problems than there are?
I think that there are actually more problems, people being harmed by fake products that are just not being reported on. Yeah. So why would we find out about it?
And this nonprofit, I imagine, regulatory idea that you have as we're wrapping up here. What could that look like?
Well, I'm working on that. I'm calling it just the Med Spa Board, and mostly because I got that domain. I just bought that domain, and I'm working with a couple other doctors who are really interested in this for the exact same reasons. They're seeing so many bad complications and issues with all the illegal stuff. But my goal with that would be it would just be certifying med spas that they are legally compliant, that they are licensed, that they have a real medical director, that they're getting real product, and that they're owned legally. And it's not going to say this place is better than the other place. It's not going to be ratings like a Michelin star.
If you have this stamp, it's approved by the blah, blah board.
Kind of like what certified organic means. When that started, nobody really knew, does that really have a meaning? What's organic? Now everybody knows what it means, right? And my goal would be you can at least look and say, oh, well, that one's certified. I'm going to go there, and avoid the place that's not certified. And my goal is to make it easy enough for the real legit med spas to get certified. It'll be a nominal fee. They just have to submit the licensure and all the document like that. Oh, yep, we're on the up and up, and that they could get certified, and that nominal fee would somehow cover the costs of getting the people to verify all this is legit.
It's almost like all these questions you told us to ask. This
that'll
entity
all be covered
does
by
it
this
for
one
you.
certificate. Exactly. And I think that all the places that are operating legally would be happy to have this, right?
Yeah.
Because then there would be this differentiator.
Also saves some time. I'm not on the phone asking the 20 questions Dr. D told me to ask.
And it's just hard to know too. If you don't know like what is legit, it's really hard to ask the right questions. And also when people are sort of answering, but working around your answer and not really answering in a forthright way, it's easy for me to tell, but it's really hard. It's like if somebody's sort of skirting around the issue, right? And I just think that every legitimate place or every place that's trying to be legitimate would be happy about this because they'd be like, all right, great, awesome, I'm certified. And then you'd advertise it and you'd be like, just go to a certified place, and then people would just know, right? Like, and let's say you want to go get Botox for the first time, your best friend or your daughter or your mom would be like, okay, just make sure it's certified. Oh, right. Okay. And that just becomes like
make sure you have your license
common knowledge.
Or whatever it is.
Yes,
yeah.
It's just common knowledge.
I think it's a great idea.
And I know there will be a lot of not legitimate places who are pissed off about it. And I'm really trying to be as even and not inflammatory as possible so that people will think it's a good thing. And I have talked to a guy who runs the American Medical Spa Association. I've talked to him about supporting that because it hasn't efforts in AmSpa. I don't know if you know what AmSpa is, but yeah. And that hasn't ever taken hold within AmSpa, but they support that. And they are very much trying to get people to be legal. It's just, they want
joining
people,
forces with them could.
Yeah. And then other docs across the country, there's a number of docs that I'm working with who are really interested in just.
Can I put in request as you work on this? Can there then also be a consumer-facing website so that we could just look up?
Yeah. Oh, that's the goal.
Even when I'm working on a story and writing, depending on the state or whatever, it is so hard to find the guidelines of who can inject what and which procedures in which state.
And that's hard for us to find too. I mean, I just know in Washington because I've been doing this for 10 years. And
you have lawyers that consulted you that are in this area of practice,
Med Spa lawyers. And the other thing is that most healthcare attorneys don't actually know. You have to really specialize in Med Spa law. And there's not very many of those. Well, or, I actually use a law firm that is Med Spa law only and they're national. But they know. Yeah. And I think that it's really hard to find that information. It's also just incredibly hard to find out who owns a company, and are they legit? Even just learning, is it a franchise versus just a corporate chain versus individually owned? It's really hard to tell sometimes.
But having this sort of accreditation would help us, the consumer. And you, the physician, see fewer complications, I imagine.
Well, let's hope. But I think also it requires like the consumers to know, right? To care.
I think a lot of them care. They just don't even know the right questions to ask.
Well, they don't even know that that it's possible to walk into a place and nobody's actually
I know, because you assume
licensed at all in that whole place. I know.
It's the Wild West out here. But
Yes, it is, basically.
Before you go, Dr. D, we do this thing at the end of our podcast, the FM5. It's like a speed round just so people can get to know you better.
Okay.
This is the fun part. So if you're up for it, first question is, do you use the Notes app on your phone?
I do.
What's the last note you wrote yourself?
Oh, my God. That's really funny.
I love asking people this.
I gotta, that's so funny because that's hilarious. They're not in order. That's so funny. I think this will be a lot. I think it was the dosage of my estrogen patch. There you go.
Love it. Okay. I know you say in your book that you were not a makeup wearer, but there must have been a first beauty product or skincare product or hair product. You have curly hair. I know this has to be true, that you remember buying and really loving.
Very first one?
Yeah.
Oh my God. We're going to go back to the 80s and it would be like mousse for my hair, changed my life.
Okay. Do you remember which mousse?
Oh my God, no, I don't. It was crappy mousse because when I was a kid growing up, there were no hair products that would deal with curly hair and everybody was busy perming their hair. I know that was ridiculous. I did not perm my hair, but there was nothing to keep the curls until mousse came out. There was 10X if you're probably too young to know. 10X was the stuff that would get you the spiky hair that we had in the 80s, but that was way, way too stiff for curly hair. But when mousse came out,
was a game changer for you.
Total game changer, yes.
Okay, you have a podcast. Who would be your fantasy interview subject? Could be someone dead or alive, related to your work or not.
A couple people. I think maybe if they'd be willing to talk about it, Jennifer Aniston or Courtney Cox, and about their journey through what they've been through, or maybe even Meg Ryan. I don't even know what Meg Ryan's doing right nowadays, but we've seen them all kind of go through like too much filler and then stop.
Okay.
And now I'm kind of curious to know. The other person would be Linda Evangelista, who I actually have tried to reach out to, but I think she probably had to sign an NDA with Allergan when she settled the lawsuit with them. But she very famously sued them because of cool sculpting and being disfigured.
And you would like to hear more?
I would love to talk to her about that, yeah.
We'd have to lift the NDA for that interview, but okay. This one's a lot easier. What's your favorite snack?
Okay. My favorite snack that I'm willing to let myself eat are just like mixed nuts from Costco. My favorite snack that I won't let myself eat is dried mango.
Oh.
Because I love, love, love dried mango. It's so yummy, but I could easily eat my weight's worth of mango in one sitting, so I try not to do that.
Okay. Very healthy of you. It's 11 a.m. on a Saturday. Let's pretend. It's your day off. Well, I don't know. You probably work some Saturdays, but let's say it's 11 a.m. on your day off. What are you most likely doing?
If it's winter, I'm skiing. If it's summer, I'm biking.
Love it. Okay. Dr. D, thank you so much for coming on the show. It was great learning how crazy and wild the world of med spas is with you.
Thank you so much for having me. I feel like we kind of scratched a lot of surfaces and there's so much really to talk about here, but I really am grateful.
That's why people are going to go get your book and then they'll know more.
Hope so.
So I'll put a link to that at the show notes too. Thank you so much.
We hope you enjoyed the show.
It's your reviews and feedback that help us make the podcast even better. Head over to iTunes to rate and review us or email your thoughts to info@fatmascara.com.
We also want to answer your beauty questions and hear what products you love. To share a Razor One product review or to ask a beauty question, email us at info@fatmascara.
If you send it as a voice memo file, we can even share your voice on the podcast. You can also do that by leaving us a voice message. Our phone number in the United States is 646-481-8182.
Thanks so much for listening.
I hope you've enjoyed this special episode of Med Spa Mayhem on the Fat Mascara Podcast. If you've learned something and like what we're doing, please tell your friends and give us a 5-star rating in your podcast app. If you have a question or a crazy story of your own you'd like to share, please send an email or voice recording to info@drkatedee.com. That's DRKATEDEE.com. Or reach us through the website medspamayhem.com. And read the book. Med Spa Mayhem is available everywhere books are sold. Thanks for listening. This has been Med Spa Mayhem with Dr. Kate D. We are so grateful you're listening, and we hope you've learned at least one fun or possibly disturbing fact today. Don't forget to hit subscribe on your podcast app and leave us a 5-star review. And read the book. Med Spa Mayhem is available everywhere books are sold. Links and more can be found in the show notes and on medSpaMayhem.com.